This is part two of a British history expert on the British Imperial War in Afghanistan. It's bloody good.
All the soldiers in their winter uniforms, guys putting up tents, camels, people wandering across rivers, dogs, munchies in carts, prisoners who've just been caught pilfering, goats, sheep. You can imagine this enormous cavalcade heading off, and they've absolutely no idea where they're going. They go up the Kojak Pass, and we all know this scene. Anyone that's ever travelled by car on their own in India, so where's Afghanistan? Go straight. No problem. And as a result, here they are. One lot heading off this way, another lot going over here. There's one lot climbing a cliff. And these guys have just given up and are on their way home to Bihar.
On our end, this is William Dalrymple, historian and author, describing the beginning of a disastrous campaign by the British in the Afghan conflict, which began in 1839. He's on stage at the 2013 Sydney Writers' Festival.
So it's not looking good. But the sheer momentum of this mad expedition means that about the three-quarters that survive this madcap expedition and turn up out the back end of the Kojak Pass through Helmand and to Kandahar find that they have such a power of surprise that the rulers of Kandahar disappear without sending a single soldier against them. And Shah Shuja can wander into Kandahar and pay his respects at his granddad's tomb. Robocop's tomb is over here, the guy with the half a face. Ahmad Shah Durrani is buried in this gorgeous tomb, which is still there today. And he goes and he pays his respects, and then they head on to Ghazni. Now, luckily, British intelligence intervenes at this time, and as we all know, they never get anything wrong. And they advise that the walls of Ghazni are so low and so unimportant that they might as well leave all the cannon behind in Kandahar. Ghazni turns out to be the largest fortress in Central Asia. But luckily some gallant chap volunteers to blow up the front gate, just rolling a barrel of gunpowder at it. And in they go. And such, again, is the shock that they capture Ghazni without cannon in a single day, that Dost Muhammad flees to Bukhara, over the Hindu Kush, and they reinstall Shah Shuja in the Bala Hissar of Kabul, which he left at the age of 21, and he's now 51. 30 years have passed. And everyone is fantastically smug, rather like the Americans in December 2001. They've conquered Afghanistan far more easily, with far fewer casualties, and with far less opposition than anyone had imagined. And they've grabbed the highlands of Central Asia. It's an amazing achievement. Astonishing strategic asset, they say. And to make it even sweeter, the Russians have just failed to take Khiva. They've got stuck in a blizzard. So everyone's feeling very good. And the Mem Saabs are brought up from Calcutta. Lady Sale comes with her grand piano, her unmarried daughter, and some seeds from her kitchen garden in Agra. My sweet peas and geraniums were much admired, she's writing by October. And in the kitchen garden, the potatoes especially thrive. And there's cricket and horse racing and open-air amateur theatricals. One regiment of cavalry even brought their foxhounds. So they go off with the foxhounds. There's snipe and duck shooting, skating in the snowman building. Alexander Burns has a Christmas party dressed up in a kilt, complete with an enormous sporran. And they even talk about making Kabul the summer capital of the Raj. But in their smug overconfidence is sown the seeds of everything which is about to go wrong. They don't build a fortress, they don't fortify themselves, they literally just line up their tents in a valley with hills on every side. It's a completely unfortified position. You can see the walls of Kabul ahead. This is the Bala Hissar. They don't go and sit in the Bala Hissar, they sit in the valley. And gradually, things begin to go wrong. I mean, again, a whole load of things that would never happen today. First thing that happens is they take their eye off the ball and they go off and invade somewhere else. In this case, Hong Kong. They start the Opium Wars. And so all the troops are withdrawn, half the troops are withdrawn from Afghanistan, and everyone forgets about it. They say that we've done it. Couldn't happen today. Then the accountants step in and says, we can't afford this. It's all very well conquering this place, but there's actually nothing to, exploit. Nothing to be an imperialist with. There's no oil we can pinch. There's nothing we can do with this land. The message goes to the High Command in Kabul, you've got to cut costs. And so first thing they do is they cut the subsidies to the border tribes who've been given money to keep the passes open. And they break their contracts with the Ghilzai tribe. And this is a big mistake. Everyone in Afghan history has always paid the tribes to keep the passes open. Obviously the CIA are doing it today, all those bundles of cash we read about last week. But this lot cut their subsidies. And immediately the roads are cut, the posts are blocked, and they lose all communication with India and with the outlying garrisons at Jalalabad and Kandahar. Then another accountant has a brilliant idea. I know, he says, we'll train up an Afghan national army. Then we can withdraw and leave them to look after themselves. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So they do that, but they piss off all the nobles because they start, in order to pay for it, they have to take the estates away from the old feudal nobles, who've been perfectly happy to have Shah Shuja foisted upon them, but they don't want to have their estates taken away from them. And then finally, just to add vinegar in the Afghan wounds, the Afghans have had put up with these Brits for a while, and they're bored stiff. They don't want, Friday night British squaddies pouring out of the pubs and being sick everywhere. They don't like the Indian sepoys, spitting pan everywhere and making a terrible mess. And they particularly don't like both of those groups sleeping with the Afghan women. There are 30,000 single men in the cantonment. And the Afghan women start going in, dressed in their burqas in the evening and coming back in the morning a little bit richer. And then Alexander Burns, whether he's wearing his kilt at the time is not clear, seduces the girlfriend of Abdullah Khan Atchaksai. And this is a big mistake. Now, I'm sure this sort of thing happens in Sydney every day, and everyone just goes and throws a stone through the window of the cuckold outside screaming at the happy couple up in their flat or whatever. But in Afghanistan, they do things differently. And Abdullah Khan Atchaksai turns up outside Burns' house. He doesn't throw a stone through the window. He burns the house down, cuts Burns' head off. Burns, meanwhile, sort of tried to run off in native dress, but been caught. Had his head cut off. He kicks they have a kind of five-a-side football with Burns' head. And then they cut up the trunk and hang it on a meat hook in the bazaar. Sir Henry McNaughton, in his top hat and blue-tinted spectacles, goes off to negotiate and is shot dead by the Afghan negotiating team. The heroic General Elphinstone, who's riddled with gout, gets onto his horse, falls off his horse, the horse falls on him, and that's the end of Elphinstone. And then the British very sensibly kept all their artillery, food and ammunition in a fortress just next to the town of Kabul. And the Afghans capture all the British supplies within 48 hours, and then take the British cannon and start pelting the British cantonments. And there's nothing the British can do. They are completely screwed. So I've forgotten the wonderful speech that Abdullah Khan Atchaksai makes as he's hacking Burns apart. He says, now we are justified in throwing off this English yoke. They stretch the hand of tyranny to dishonour private citizens, great and small. Making love to a slave girl isn't worth the ritual bath that follows it, but we have to put a stop to it right here, right now. Otherwise, and this is the key passage to remember, otherwise these English will ride the donkey of their desire into the field of stupidity. Now, we've all done that in our time, but it's best not to do it in Afghanistan. So they have to, eventually, they fight for a month, but it's all over. They can't get reinforcements from India. They can't get messages even to Jalalabad or to Kandahar. And the passes are closed, the snow comes down. By pure ill fortune, it's the hardest winter for 40 years, and there's thick snow up in the passes, blocking the road. And yet, the British madly, rather than going up into the Bala Hissar, which they could easily have gone into, they decide instead to risk a dash back to India. And they get permission from the Afghans who've taken their surrender to have a safe passage back to Jalalabad. It's not even clear whether they can get through the snow. But idiotically, this is the plan. So on the morning of the 6th of January, 1842, 18,500 men, women and children, of whom only 700 are actually British troops, 4,500 sepoys from Bihar and UP who are more or less completely incapacitated in the snow. They've never fought in snow, they've got no idea about winter warfare. And all these 12,000 camp followers, often kids, old men and women, leave the British cantonment and head off for India. And the Ghilzais obviously are waiting for them in the passes, the Ghilzais who've had their contracts broken. They've got these long-barreled Jazelles. The British have this musket called the Brown Bess, which is a fabulous weapon which won Waterloo, for ideal in a flat European battlefield, but it only fires 300 yards. And these things fire about half a mile with an enormous charge of powder. And the Afghans know this, so they just dig their slit trenches halfway up the mountains and wait for the British to come. Now, among those on the retreat is my great-great-uncle, Colin Mackenzie. This is his account. At 9 a.m., the troops moved off, a crouching, drooping, dispirited army. So different from the smart, light-hearted body of men they appeared some time ago. The men sinking a foot deep in the snow with each step. My heart sunk within me, under the conviction that we were a doomed force. I always remember as one of the most humiliating sights of that heart-rending day, fixing my eyes by chance on a little Hindustani girl, 2 years old, just strong enough to sit upright with her little legs doubled underneath her, hair curving in curling locks around her soft little throat, and her great black eyes, dilated twice their normal size, fixed on the armed men, the passing cavalry, and all the strange sights that met her gaze. Many other children, as young as innocent, I saw slain on the road, and women with their long dark hair wet with their own blood. Our rear guard had to fight the whole way to the camping site at Bagram and pass through a literally continuous line of poor wretches, men, women and children, dead or dying from cold or the wounds, who, unable to move, entreated their comrades to kill them and put an end to their misery. So amazingly, the British then go and do exactly the same mistake they've already made at the beginning of the siege. They don't guard their commissariat. First out of the cantonment are the cavalry, then follows the infantry, last are the baggage. And of course, as the baggage is waiting to cross the Kabul River, the jihadis and the Ghazis seize it and loot it. So the cavalry arrive at Bagram the first night at about 5 in the afternoon, ready, wanting their tea, wanting their tent, ready for dinner. And neither the tent, nor the dinner, nor the tea arrives, nor does any kind of shelter. By 6 o'clock it's dark, and the temperature's gone down to -20. By 10 o'clock it's quite clear that nothing is coming. So you've got a whole army going hungry, and as they're sitting there, suddenly the skyline is lit up with orange, and the whole cantonment's on fire. Everything they left behind has been fired, and they have 6 days to go with no food to get to Jalalabad. So they're completely stuck. At this point, Mackenzie's Jezailchis, these are the Afghans, show what could be done. They dig foxholes in the snow, little circular foxholes. They light a fire in the middle, and then they lie body to body in a circle around the fire, so that they use each other's natural body heat to keep themselves intact in the cold. And they put all their cloaks and their turbans, everything they've got on top of them. And that way, it's not a very comfy night, but they wake up the following morning with all their bits still intact. Unlike the poor Indian sepoys, who've got absolutely no idea how to survive in the snow, just lie down on the ice, half of them do not wake up the following morning. The other half that do wake up, most of them find their extremities, their toes and their fingers, are like charred logs of wood. They are completely incapacitated. And at this moment, in the following morning, when they wake up, Wazir Akbar Khan, the Afghan resistance leader, the son of Dost Muhammad, appears behind them and herds them, like a shepherd, into the Kabul Pass. Now, the British can't see anything. The Kabul is so narrow, only 7 or 8 men can walk abreast. But they begin to hear this spooky, strange, metallic noise. A noise so unmistakable in its character, writes Lady Sale, that it can never be forgotten by those whose ears have once been startled by the unfamiliar ringing sound. Then the ambush is sprung. The confusion was fearful. This is Lady Sale again. We had not proceeded half a mile when we were heavily fired upon. The pony my daughter rode was wounded in the ear and the neck. I fortunately had only one ball in my arm. 3 others passed through my cloak near the shoulder without doing me injury. That night, the sepoys and camp followers, half frozen, tried to force their way not only into my tent but into my bed. Many poor wretches died around the tent that night. Many women and children were abducted. So 18,500 troops leave the British cantonment on the 6th of January 1842. 2 nights later, there's only 11,000 of those left. They then have to head up to the highest point in this journey, the Tezeen Pass, steep climb. And at the top of the Tezeen Pass, they get caught in the most almighty blizzard. Those who survive that come down the following day. There's only about 5,000 left. And at the bottom, they face, at the village of Jagdalik, a holly hedge has been erected blocking their path. And they hit it at about 6 in the evening when it's dusk and they can barely see what's happening. And there's an ambush again sprung as they hit it. The cavalry trample the infantry impaled on spikes as they try and clamber over this. It's a total disaster. And only 200 men make it beyond the holly hedge. Everyone else either captured or killed. And those 200 men are exposed the following day on the hill of Gundamuk. They are surrounded by 10,000 Afghans, and it's clear they're not going anywhere. So they form a square and they shoot their last rounds. Then they fight on with their bayonets. There's a last bayonet charge, and then they're all killed. 1 man survives to tell the tale, Thomas Souter. 15 cavalry make it a little bit further. They manage to vault over the holly hedge, and they make it as far as the Nimla Gardens, built by Shah Jahan in the 1640s. Gorgeous gardens with runnels of water.
Okay, that's the end of part 2.